Welcome to Get Motivated with Donato Parisi, a show designed to reach you where you are, focusing on the fact that you can be anything you want and desire. All you have to do is get motivated. If you need a challenge in your life, then look no further. Get Motivated with Donato begins now.
Hey everyone, welcome. And today we have a special speaker. Very excited here to hear from her, and her name is Charisse Burton, and she was in the Women of Power Ignited to Serve book also. And we're going to talk a lot about her story, her background, and the things that she has experienced in life, like much of our own lives, right? We all experience things. We all go through things. And it's how we get through those things, what brings us through those things, that helps build us up, right? So we're gonna get into it here, and just welcome Charisse.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. I appreciate you guys having me. I have looked forward to this. I think it's going to be so much fun. So yeah, I'm ready to dive in.
All right, great. Good to have you here as well. I got this little icebreaker question that I like. It's kind of out there a little bit, but it gives us a interesting view on life. So if you could meet anyone, be it in the past or present, who would it be and why?
That is, you hear those questions every now and then, and that is such a hard question for me.
It is.
It's hard. I mean, you go through all these things and you think, oh, I'll say Jesus.
Exactly.
But, of course, let's just say Jesus goes without saying. But it really does go without saying, because you just wonder, especially today, what in the world would he think about some of the things that are going on, and what would he say? That'd be a long discussion.
Yeah.
But aside from that, I thought of Mark Twain, and then anybody from my ancestry.
Oh, that would be cool. Yeah.
Wouldn't that be cool to find out, just generations, like 5 generations ago or 10 generations ago, just kind of to maybe be a fly on the wall even, or just see what their life is like, or interview them. That to me would be really interesting. Really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I would even just like to have met my own grandfather that I'm named after.
Oh, yeah.
Because he came over on the boat,
Yeah.
and just to see, like, how was it for him as a boy, or his father Vito. We're all named one after the other, so it's Donato Vito, Donato Vito, Donato Vito, going back. And
that's not confusing at all.
Yeah. but it, like you said, it would be interesting to see what that ancestry was all about. And I've often wondered, how far back does it go? I mean, my people nailed Jesus to the cross, right?
Yeah, that's inappropriate right there. No.
But I mean, that's true. It's like, how far, does it go back? And I don't know. So those are interesting things. So that's pretty cool. I like the Mark Twain thing too. That was neat.
I just like, he has all these little sayings that I always find so interesting. Like, there's the 2 most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why.
Yeah.
And I just think that's really cool. And did he just sit around and think up those things, or how did he come up with stuff like that? But those types of little sayings are very interesting to me. So I think Mark Twain would be right up there.
One of the ones I like, and I can't remember his name right off the top of my head, maybe you do, is the one where the cemeteries are full of treasures, right? The ones that were never written, never taught, or something to that context, right? Where all of the people that have died had
Mhm.
books, right? They
Oh, that's good.
nowadays would have TV shows or be inventors or, all of these different things had songs to sing, right? It's like, think of the wealth that's in a cemetery because people never took that step to get out of their comfort zone or be motivated or just have the opportunity, to get out there to do the things like we're doing with this book, with
That's the
with
truth.
this podcast or other things. And that's kind of what the motive of this podcast is about, right? Is to get people motivated
Mm-hmm.
and, get out of your comfort zone or see that you've got so much potential. So that's where we're going to talk here now about your book again,
Mm-hmm.
Women of Power Ignited to Serve. Woohoo!
Yes,
There'll
I have mine right here.
Yeah, there'll be ways to get connected with you in the description below, and we'll get to
Yes.
that here later when we close. But your chapter, which is awesome,
You.
it says learning to serve from nothing,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought that was really really unique, and so I want to kind of talk about some of this. I'll let you open it up, and then I've got so much that I want to ask you about the stuff that's in your chapter because, man, you touched on so much things that I think is just so important, be if you're a man, woman,
Mm-hmm.
young, old, wherever you are in the world, like you can relate. Everybody should be able to relate to something that you wrote about in this chapter. So take it away and tell us a little bit about your chapter.
I absolutely agree that I think anyone can relate to some part of that chapter because I think there's so many people. I actually think it is just rampant. It's not just with women, but it is a large majority of women, large majority, who really just believe so many lies about themselves. I think most of society does, but me being a woman, that's where I can speak from specifically, but we believe so many lies about ourselves and we grow up and have so many different experiences. And so those of us who have what I call a colorful childhood had a lot of different experiences that were not necessarily what some would consider mainstream. So you start thinking everybody else's life is perfect,
right?
And mine is not. But when you start really, I guess, looking behind the curtain, first of all, there's no such thing as perfect. Right. There's no such thing as normal. No, those two words, there's no such thing as either one of them. But we think that, and we tend to isolate ourselves because we think we're protecting ourselves. And so when I isolate myself from someone else who's struggling and they're isolating themselves from something that they're struggling with, there's no shared experience. There's no, oh, I'm not the only one. None of that happens. You feel like you're the only one. So you grow up thinking, just like I said in the book, you have nothing to offer and nothing about you is valuable and there's no worth. And that's why I think you're right. It can be male or female, can identify sometimes with what's I wrote in that chapter, because so many people grow up and keep those things a secret. They keep the difficulties, the challenges, the struggles secretive because it's hard to share. It's hard to let those walls down. We don't want to be judged. I mean, I lived all that. I went through all the way into my adult years trying to hide all of that and keep everything, all my ducks in a row, and everything had to be perfect. And, it's kind of hard after you start having multiple kids. I mean, it's hard anyway, but when you have multiple children and multiple boys, it gets harder. And my second son was like, oh no, we don't play like that. I was like, oh my gosh. So you go into your adult years trying to hold it all together. And I believe 100% that is why there is so much depression in the world. I mean, yes, there's so many other variables to it, but there's so much depression in the world because we internalize everything, because we don't share it, and because we don't want to be judged because people judge. I mean, it's just a vicious cycle. And so that's why I walked that out thinking nobody else had a childhood like mine. Everybody else's was, like I used in another conversation, and always I had to be June Cleaver. And, and for those of you who do not know who that is, Google.
For our younger viewers out there.
But, that perfect childhood, or the Brady Bunch, and even in those shows, you can read books about them. And it's so funny because on the outside, it's perfect. But you read books about what was going on behind the scenes, and it's horrific. And that's just like truth. That's the world. We try to make everything on the outside look perfect, and behind the scenes, everything's falling apart. And so it wasn't until, I started sharing more about that. It wasn't until they say the hardest thing to do is to acknowledge the problem and ask for help. It's true. But when you do that, it's just exactly like the darkness cannot be in the light.
Yeah.
So when you acknowledge the problems, when you acknowledge the struggle, the light shines on it. And when the light shines on it, healing starts to take place, and the darkness cannot be in the light.
That's right.
And so there was so much, whenever I started acknowledging it and understanding that it's not just me, other people have issues like this. And when I chose to go through healing, and so that's one thing I want people to hear is it doesn't just happen overnight. There is a healing process that takes time. And sometimes even now, I'm 30 years past when I started the healing process, and I still go back, because a lot of those wounds that you get as children are deep, super deep, but it's so different even now than it was 30 years ago or 20 years ago or 10 years ago, because God is in all of that. God is in all of that. So just knowing that it doesn't happen overnight. I always tell people, don't look at me and think, this is how I, this is how I came out. So not true. I mean, oh my goodness. Because of all of that happened, and in the book, in my chapter, there's 2 events that happened that God really opened my eyes. And he says, when you seek him with everything, then you will find him.
Amen.
And that's exactly what I had to do. I mean, I dealt with so much fear. I mean, fear, I remember specifically when it came on me, because before then, I'm a teenager and I'm 20 and I'm just like living life and that invincible feeling. And then all of a sudden, after I got married, my husband is amazing, but I realized I could lose something. And just fear overwhelmed me. And it was a coat. It was a thick, heavy coat. And I mean, I wouldn't cross the street by myself. I didn't spend the night by myself. I mean, it was my husband he's so patient, but that fear was so heavy on me that sometimes I would just lay awake at night and just say the word Jesus, just his name over and over and over again, so that I could feel a little safety to fall asleep. Wow. It was just an overwhelming, and I know where the seed came from as a child, but it just kind of reawoken or rebirthed, woke up again as an adult. But,
right.
All of that is we wear that so heavily on us and don't open up. We don't ask for help. We don't acknowledge that we can choose to get better, because it's not easy to go, okay, I'm not going to be afraid anymore. I'm going to not believe those things that my mother said about me anymore. It doesn't happen that easily, and those 2 experiences, I had been seeking God for years, even through the depression. And those 2 experiences were so significant to me. But again, I'm super stubborn, which is, I still call it my greatest strength. It's my greatest strength. My husband would not agree, I'm sure,
Yeah.
But it is. You have to be that stubborn and hard-headed to get to where you are, because you have to choose every day to acknowledge that you're going to grow. That you're going to choose to step out of the comfort zone or extend the comfort zone. You're going to have to choose to motivate yourself, which, we talk about that. And, one of the things that I was looking at over the questions was the question about, what I defined, how I defined motivation. And to me, it is being compelled to action.
Nice.
And, whether it is from your own thoughts, whether it is from reading a book or whatever the fact, it is compelled to action. But you still have to take that action.
That's right.
You can be motivated, and I'm so motivated to go to the gym. But, I haven't been in a while. So it's the action is far behind the motivation right now.
Mm-hmm.
But to see the result of the motivation, you have to have that action step in the middle. You just have to. And so, every day it is a battle to go from the person I was 30, 40 years ago, super, super shy, very quiet, always tried to hide. Everything had to be perfect. If you looked at me wrong, I would start crying. I mean, it was turmoil underneath the surface, to growing to who I am today, knowing that God created me to be, I don't want to say loud, but, more just outgoing and demonstrative, and not to hide behind the scenes. But it was safer behind the scenes, but again, that was inside that comfort zone. And God is not the one who creates a comfort zone.
Nope.
No. And that steps on my own toes. That really steps on my own toes, because it is getting beyond that where the growth happens.
Yep. You touched on so much, and I want to unpack all of that, but let's see if we can try to do some of it in a I don't know, in a certain order or something. I don't know. Again, there's so much there. Yeah. Like, one of my favorite quotes too is from Ray Kroc, the founder of McDonald's. And, he says, when you're green, you're growing, when you're ripe, you rot. And I think that's so key to, like, a lot of what you're saying there, right? We need to, all of us, learn and grow and learn and grow and learn and grow, right? We need to keep learning and growing in all that we do. We'll never really truly arrive.
Exactly.
And when we think we do, hopefully we get a little wake up call that says, nope, not that we want to fail, not that I wish anybody to fail, right?
Right.
Through God, through Christ, we can do all things. But the thing is, like, we need to keep that proper attitude, right? Have that humility and different things. But I want to go back to some of what you talked about, because you referred to those seeds when you were younger, and different words, and you talk about it in the book that like words can hurt. And especially if they're coming from our parents or other loved ones or whoever it is, right? People in authority, different things. And if we're told things, especially, like, we're not important, or you can't do that, or whatever the case might be, as a young child, right? We can tend to really latch on to those things and believe them. And then it gives us, a complex in a sense, right? But we develop that because it's become our paradigm. It's become our mindset. And we don't think we can become anything because of that. So I want you to maybe dive a little deeper and talk to us about, like, maybe some of the things you've overcome and how can we, like learn from that? How can we grow from that and not let those things define us?
I think that is the hardest, absolute hardest thing I've ever done, is to retrain. I was just saying this earlier today. The hardest thing I've ever done is retrain my brain, because it's true, when you hear things, especially from your parents. And, my mom she had a lot of issues, a lot of problems. And to hear things over and over again, like, what I heard, one statement was, when people find out how you really are, they're going to leave you. And to hear that over and over again, oh my word, the havoc that, I'm just going to say I'm in my later 50s. Okay. And I'm okay with that. But for that long of a time, I still hear it like it was yesterday. And the point I want to make from that is, anybody who's listening, it is not abnormal. It is not wrong for you to still feel that gut-wrenching pain from something that happened when you were, 6. That makes sense. But what we need to do is choose to release that, which is not easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but the way we can do that is to replace it by who God says we are. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of forgiveness that has to take place. Absolutely a lot of forgiveness for you, more than even for the other individual, but for you. But replacing the statements that you've heard, whether it is something like that, whatever the statements are, is, like we said, when you hear it from your parents, when you hear it from other people, replacing that statement with who God says you are, and reminding yourself over and over and over again, is what it took for me to finally start. Because here's what it looks like. This is a mental image of what it looks like when somebody says something to you. Imagine a board, and somebody is hammering a nail in that board. Okay? They're hammering those nails in that board. They can take the nail out, but there's still a hole in the board. So when somebody is saying those, something terrible to you, they can apologize to you, and you can forgive them. We should forgive them, but that hole is still there. You can't unhear things sometimes.
Yeah.
So you have to fill in that hole with who God says you are, and remind yourself on a regular basis. I guess putty is the word of God, going into those holes and filling that space so that the board is whole again. The board is whole again, but only because you allowed God to replace that. And that's what I had to do. And I just want to reiterate, it did not happen overnight for me. It takes time. And I am the most impatient person in the world. I do not like to wait. I do not like to peel the onion back a layer at a time. I just want to rip it apart, be done with it. But that's not how things work. I understand that. I don't like it, but I understand it. So that's why I want to encourage people. It might seem daunting, and it did. It seemed like I was never going to get past all of the stuff I heard. I was taken to a children's home when I was, I think 4th or 5th grade. I was put in a children's home and ran away, put back in the crazy house, and then ran away from home when I was 17. So there's a lot of things that happened, and you just think, I'm never going to get past all this stuff. I'm never going to get past it. Baby steps, one day at a time, and it will make a difference. But God can heal things like you never thought were possible, but we have to choose to allow that to happen. And part of
that action step, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the action step, along with forgiveness.
Yeah. Well, and forgiveness is huge. And I don't think a lot of people know or realize it. We talk about it a lot, right? Like, especially in the Christian circles, forgive. It's, it's almost like, I don't know, just so commonplace or something.
Yes.
but there's more to it, and I think maybe we don't talk about it enough, that to get into the real finite part of it, right? Where, yes, Jesus forgives us of our sins. We have to ask for forgiveness, and we should forgive others. But there's more to it than that. Why should we do these things? And it's because if we don't, right, that hatred, that bitterness, that resentment, all of those different things that fill you, that get inside of you, that gives you that fear, that doubt, that unbelief, that resentment, whatever it is, it eats away at you. It tears you down, and it destroys, right? The thief comes to kill, steal, and destroy. That's what it does. And if you don't let go of those things, if you don't forgive people, forgive yourself, right?
Yes.
Then all of those things are going to continue to eat away at your bones, at your spirit, just at every little thing, right? And then we have walls that we build up because of these things, right? And you even talk about that a little bit in the book, where we're building up these walls, and I've done it myself in life, because you get hurt so much, and you put people at a distance, and you learn how to judge that distance, and they can't come any further than this, and you're not going to let anybody in because they're just going to hurt you or leave you, like you said, and all of these different things. And it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. All of these things we both can do these things, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like, we don't let things get through, and we have to. So I don't know. Maybe you can. We're talking somewhat spiritually about some of this stuff, right? And that's great, because we all need the love of God in our lives.
Yes.
And what, if anything, got through your wall, or how can you help people to break down the walls that they've built up?
The only, you said that we're talking about this more spiritually, and I have to say, I don't know how to get through all of that without what God did for me.
Yeah.
I don't think, for me, I don't think I would have. I don't know that I would have been able to get through all of that without him and without his intervention. That's one thing I would say for sure. And I absolutely agree, that forgiveness factor, you're right. We don't talk about it deeply enough, and we don't acknowledge that, when you're holding on to those little things. And I did it. I'm telling you, I did it. I held on to it for years. I mean, and it builds into a hatred, and that ugliness and that anger and those bursts of rage and all of that is healed almost. I won't say totally, but that absolutely can be healed almost like that when you start the forgiveness process. There's so much other stuff that takes time, but when you start the forgiveness process, it almost is like a cleansing, and it releases you, because when you are still holding on to those things, you are choosing to step into continuing the turmoil. And so to tear down those walls, to answer your question, it is to acknowledge that you want to forgive someone. And it starts with just wanting to, because you're never going to feel like it. You have to want to first, and eventually it'll come to the feeling, but you have to just choose to want to, and know that that's okay. Right. That is okay to not feel it, but choose to want to forgive somebody. And then walking through that. But even more than that, for me to really start to tear down, allow those walls to be torn down, basically, is I had to bombard myself with the opposite. And that's exactly what I did. I had books, I had podcasts, I wrote in my journals every day. And I don't usually do that, but I wrote in my journals every day. I had tapes because, I had all the things, but I listened to them in the house, in the car, read the books to the point where my kids are like, please don't play that again. Like, no, Mom has to listen to this or you might not make it till tomorrow. It's just those things I had to do, but I had to bombard myself because the voice, the inner critic, so to speak, the voice of everything that was wrapped up in what I grew up with was so loud. I had to overpower it with the positivity and who God says I was or am, and what he says I can do, and that I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And I had to overpower that voice, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. No, and that's so true, right? We gotta, the Bible talks about having the mind of Christ, right? And if we're listening to our own thoughts, the world's thoughts, other people's thoughts, the devil, and all the garbage that he tries to throw in there, it can be confusing. We have to build ourselves up continuously, right? I mean, even an example for my own self, like sometimes, if I'm working a lot and sitting at the desk, right, I'm not necessarily listening to music or something, and after not hearing good uplifting Christian music after a few days or something, it's like, oh, I need that, right? Because I need to get like replenished. I need to get recentered and focused on God and find that balance, right? Because it's so hard to get out of balance. You touched on the impatient thing. I can so relate, right? That fast mood mentality, man. It's like, I want it now. I got it now. And hurry up, and it doesn't help that I was raised by a master sergeant, because it's like, yes, sir, right away, sir, and all of those different things, and so you see these things happening to yourself, and you, again, that's that paradigm we talked about, that mindset, that those things that are founded in us as a child, and we've got to somehow learn how to get through those things, right? Be it good or bad. They help define who we are, but they don't have to continue to define who we are or let them become who we are to become, right?
Right.
So like how did you find your purpose and plan for your life, and how did that work out? Like, knowing all of the stuff that you went through, right? Those cards that were dealt, right? How do you take those cards that you're dealt, all those paradigms, those things that got planted inside of you, right? And what kind of a harvest did you reap? Did you change those cards in for a new hand? And what did it take for you to find that purpose, that plan, and get out of that murk and that mire? And how can you encourage others to do that?
Man, I wanted to turn in my cards. I mean, so many times I was angry with not just the people who raised me. I was angry with God for putting me in that family. I mean, I kept saying, why did I have to be in that family? But all families have their issues. Hopefully not to the degree that I experienced, but, you asked about my purpose, and I know there's so much more to it, but when I was little, I always wanted to be a mom. I had, my grandmother was amazing on my dad's side, would get me every baby. I had 2 of some baby dolls. I had, I don't know, I want to say hundreds of them, but I had a lot of baby dolls. I always wanted to be a mom. And we have 4 sons now. And when I started having, when I was pregnant with my first one, my mom was still abusive verbally. And that's where it kind of came to a head finally, that I had to figure out my own way to heal and forgive so that I don't continue the cycle.
Yep.
Because that anger was in there. It was there. And that, I think it's going to be different for everyone. But again, for me, it was a lot of prayer. I refused to go to counseling. And that is not the right way, but I'm just saying at that point I learned better, but I refused to go to counseling because I was, brought up that if you had enough faith, you shouldn't need that. You shouldn't need medication. You should be better than all that because you have faith. And finally, a general practitioner that went to church with us on a very particularly horrible day said, Charisse, that is bad theology. That's bad theology. Just because you are a Christian does not mean that you shouldn't go to counseling. And it does not mean that you shouldn't be on medication. There's all kind of medication out there that we use for all kinds of things. And that finally resonated with me. And for me, getting into counseling and starting to take medication to adjust my serotonin level, because he explained to me with the childhood I had, I used up a lot of serotonin, and serotonin does not replenish as quickly as we think it does, or it just doesn't replenish quickly enough. So I used a lot of serotonin just to have a baseline existence. And so I got on the medication. It helped tremendously, but that wasn't the only thing. Yes, it helps. The counseling helps, but still knowing and choosing to believe. And that is so hard. It is so hard when you don't grow up that way, but choosing to believe you are the most valuable thing in God's eyes. And because he is God, he can look at the next person and say that person is the most valuable thing in God's eyes. We can't identify that way as humans, but because he is God, he can look at each and every individual on this earth and say, that person is my favorite. That person is the apple of my eye.
That's right.
I had to start choosing to believe that. So much of the healing process takes place in your head, which is the hardest place, because you can't, get up and do 25 sit-ups or what. I mean, you can, to help you start clearing your mind, but the process of retraining your brain specifically takes place in your brain. And it is choice after choice of choosing, I'm going to believe what God says today, not what that other voice says. And when I can't believe it, I'm going to call someone who will help me remember. I will talk to my husband. He would do that if I was having a particularly difficult day, or another friend. So you have that accountability person who knows your story.
Yep.
And can help you stay on track. And then I guess it goes back to knowing your why. We hear that all the time about different things, but at that point in time in my life, my why was to not be the mom to my children that my mother was to me. And I had to change that because it was coming out and it terrified me. So that was the most important thing to me, hands down. And we have 4 sons now. And I know that is part of my purpose because they have a purpose. Our boys' names are Zachary, Zane, Zeth, and Zion. Zachary means in remembrance of God. Zane means God is gracious. Zeth, his name is Zeth Christian. He is the appointed follower of Christ. Nice. And Zion's name means dwelling place of the Lord.
Yep.
we did not name those. We named Zachary, and God took over. And I think he intended for us to name him Zachary. But it was, there's all a purpose. And it's, you know, my husband has a story. It's, you know, he wasn't supposed to be here, my husband. Wow. But the doctor talked his mom out of the situation that she was choosing. And so he is here in the doctor's office.
Wow.
And if he, I mean, so to me, I look at that and think, wow, God, what else do you have in store? Not just for me and Andy, but for these 4 men that you wanted to be here, that the enemy tried to keep from being here, and that you specifically named. I mean, I'm just kind of watching what's going on because I don't know.
Yep.
I don't know. But going back to your question, it is so much about choosing to continue. It is so much about choosing to retrain your brain. And there's no simple way. I did a lot of writing. And sometimes I couldn't write anything else except I deserve, because I had to keep my hands busy and keep my mind busy. Even though I wasn't feeling it, I still wrote it.
Well, you got to confess it until you believe it, right?
Exactly. That's exactly right. Mm-hmm.
Well, and it's, you talk a lot about God showing up in your life, and and you know, I'm a pastor too, right? Where yeah, faith is great, and I talk a lot about, you know, you can't live in fear and in faith. You got to pick one, right? So I think that's a key thing for all of us,
right?
But you know, you were talking about, you know, having faith and stuff like that, and we're all supposed to have great faith and stuff like that. So don't get me wrong, you know, for any of things, but the, like what you just touched on, you know, about taking help, right? Or seeking help.
Yep.
I mean, we need to do that, and that's what Christ especially is there for, right? I mean, God made everything.
Yes.
He's given us doctors. I mean, I'm all for healing, don't get me wrong.
I agree.
But, you know, I broke my leg as a kid. The bone was sticking out my leg. I need to like go to the hospital.
Yes, you did.
Okay. And you know, so there's some things where, yeah, faith is great, but we also need to have some common sense, right? Sometimes we need help, and that help might come from somebody that God's ordained
exactly
to do that certain thing. And through that, we get the help and the deliverance that we need. And that is still the same thing, right? I mean, it's like the guy is sitting on top of his house.
Yes.
He's saved from God, and the rowboat comes by because he's in a flood, you know, and he's like, hop on in. He's like, no, I'm waiting for God to save me. And he goes by, calls the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard comes, and you know, they try to save the guy, and he's like, no, I'm waiting for God to save me. And you know, storm's picking up and things like that. The water's getting choppy, so they call in the helicopter, and they throw down a line and try to rescue the guy. And he's like, nope, I'm waiting for God to save me. And then he wakes up in heaven, and he's like, well, what happened, God? And God's like, hey, I sent you 2 boats and a helicopter. What do you want?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like
that is exactly right.
You know, that's just how life is, and we got to recognize those things, that God is sending us stuff. He is trying to help us. We got to get out of our own mindset, our own stinking thinking.
Yes.
The way we were programmed. I mean, you were talking about, you know, making sure you didn't pass on those things to your kids that were ingrained in you as a kid. And man, I mean, I've tried to do that. How well I've succeeded, I'm not sure, because I am such my father's son, right? I'm all about that, yes, sir, right away, sir, kind of mentality and different things. And it can be tough. It can be challenging, right?
Absolutely.
But you said in the book here, and I love this is your quote, or I'm quoting you. It says, perhaps our biggest and most critical battle is in choosing what you think and believe.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I mean, that just hit me when I read that. I was like, wow, right? And I mean, we should just read it again. Perhaps our biggest and most critical battle, or crucial battle, is choosing what to think and believe. And that is so true. And you also pointed out in that same area that the only thing that we can control is our thoughts.
Yep.
And it's just like what you said. And the verse we quoted here from 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5, I'm just going to read the whole thing because it speaks to what we're talking about here. It says, casting down arguments and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ.
Yes.
Right? That's we got to take those thoughts captive. You know, the things that are telling us we're no good, people are going to leave us, whatever else, right? And we got to line it up, like your analogy, poking the holes through the board and filling them up with putty. I love that. You know, that's so true. You know, and you talk in this chapter here a lot about serving, right?
Yes.
And one of the things that I got from this, you pointed out, is that serving is also standing in the gap for someone.
Yes.
And I want you to talk a little bit more about that, like, because again, we have different mindsets. We all have different perceptions, the way we see the world. And I think it's important for all of us to look at things differently, to look at things from other people's perspectives so we can see the world in a different light. So if you can, again, share those things, like, you know, how it is to serve and standing in the gap for someone. And there was other things you mentioned too. So,
well, you know, first thing is you cannot serve if you're not willing to knock the walls down, or at least let them down, or climb over them or something. You cannot serve anyone else. You can't do that. And standing in the gap for someone, to me, is giving them the opportunity, to give them a leg up, to give them, to help them learn, to help them grow. That to me is what serving is about, whether it is to allow them rest so they can grow, or whether it is just to give them the opportunity to do that. And so our job is to stand in the gap that is needed. And it's different for everybody. Like you said, everybody needs different, they have different situations. It comes from different backgrounds, but to have the opportunity to serve, you know, whenever we are so closed off and we're still living in that turmoil and choosing to live in there, I'm just going to say it from my perspective, it can be come from a very selfish perspective. And I can say that from you know, my perspective, it was very selfish because I could only see so far, but at the same time, I could only see so far. Mm-hmm. So it's like a catch-22. And it wasn't until I started to, again, start the forgiveness process, let the walls down, choose what I was allowing to go through my brain, which is, that's about, like I said, the only thing on the planet we have control over is what goes through our brain. And what goes through our brain is what we will bring into reality. And so when we are choosing to let the truth go through our brain and who God says we are, then serving with the gifts that He has given us, it almost comes naturally. It is right there. But if we don't open that door, those gifts stay hidden, they stay buried. We can't serve anybody else because we are just focused on what's going on in here. And again, I understand 100% what it feels like to not be able to get out of bed because depression is so heavily on you. I understand what it's like to not know who you are and not know what direction to go, or to not even know what you feel like your purpose is on this planet, because your thoughts are so dark. But again, I also know we have the ability, not just the ability, we are called to and have the authority to change those thoughts and to choose to believe the truth.
That's right.
So I can see it from both sides. So I don't want anybody to ever hear me say, you're just being selfish if you're not using your gifts and you're not, if you're not serving. That's not what I'm saying. But I do know that's where we're coming from if we're choosing not to grow, because I've been there and I know we can get out of that. And that's what I want anybody who ever feels, if you feel like you need to reach out to somebody, I get it. I'm someone who's walked this path. I absolutely get it. You can send me an email. You can reach out to me, because it is not easy. And I completely understand the work it takes to retrain your brain and get to the point where you do acknowledge you've got gifts, that you can stand in the gap for someone else, and that you can serve them. I get that.
Yep. No, absolutely. And you just mentioned like your email. We'll have that in the description below, and we'll give you a chance here in a moment to also talk a little bit more about information on that you have for others as well. But you touched on the gifts that God gives us. This has got to be one of my favorite subjects too, where God gives us so many things, but then we've talked about that pressure we put on ourselves.
Yeah.
And the enemy talking in our ear, right? And I've done this myself, where it's like, you think, well, God can't use me anymore.
Exactly.
And different things like that, right? Where you just don't, you're getting down on yourself. You're not believing in yourself because, again, paradigms, seeds planted, right? Different things. But the thing is, God loves us.
Yes, he does.
And God is there for us, and he wants the best for us. And we're the apple of his eye. You talked about that. And all of these different things. And talk a little bit more about the gifts that God gives us, because like when I talk about them, I really believe that God's given all of us something, right? And maybe it's just one to start, but if we grow that thing, right, and we nurture it, the old saying, the grass is greener on the other side. Well, why is it greener? It's because they've taken care of it, right? They've
watered
it, they've cut it, they've fertilized it, and all that kind of stuff. If you do the same thing, your grass is going to be just as green, thick, and luscious.
Yes.
So, it's like our gifts. We got to nurture them, right? We got to seek after God and see those things that he wants for us. So give us a little insight on those gifts of God and what we can do.
Well, the first thing I want to say too about that is I absolutely know 100% without a doubt, when you love God and that is all you can bring yourself to do, and let's say you struggle your whole life and you cannot get those walls down and you cannot find a place to serve, God still loves you. He still wants you. We just want you to live the fullest life you could possibly live, which is beyond those walls. But God is in there. No matter what you do, or who you forgive or not forgive, he still loves you. So I want to say that first, but I know when we step outside of who we are or who we think we are, and we start really believing who God called us to be, those gifts are there. Every single one of us is born a spiritual being. Every single one of us.
Yep.
Every single one of us has, I believe, multiple gifts.
Yep.
But when we don't nurture them, like you said, it's just like a muscle. It will atrophy if it's not used. We have to use our gifts. We have to nurture those gifts. We have to practice. They're not going to be, amazing right off the bat. We have to use them just like anything else and get better at them and strengthen them so that then we can use them more and more and find out what other gifts we have. And
Right.
Every single person has a different gift. I mean, some have the same, there's the gift of hospitality, gift of prophet. My sister-in-law is the most hospitable person in the world. I would love to be more hospitable. That is not, I'll still have people over to my house, but that is not my number one gift. My number one gift is encouragement, believe it or not, which, years ago, I would have been, somebody told me that and I thought, okay, you are just crazy because you don't know what my life has been like. Now I know it makes so much sense because the enemy wanted to shut me up.
Mm-hmm.
And that is my number one gift, is the gift of encouragement and pouring into other people and seeing them. I can see who God created you to be before you can. And I love being able to do that. Everybody has a gift, and it could be one of those two. It could be something else. But when you use those gifts for God's kingdom, they are going to grow and grow and grow. But even more than that, you're going to help somebody else unleash their gifts. When you use your gifts, it will help somebody else unleash their gifts. And it's like a trickle-down effect. It just explodes over and over. And I think that's what God intended our gifts to do, so that we could serve one another in our gifts. And then other people would do the same, and it would just grow. Yeah. Imagine if this whole world did that.
Well, and we're supposed to be living that Ephesians life.
Mm-hmm.
Paul wrote about these things. And if we just look at the book of Ephesians, I know like when you get saved and stuff, and everybody always recommends read John first. And John's a great book, right? Don't get me wrong. But if you read Ephesians, wow, it nails Christianity as a whole as far as what it should be, and it really points out like the love of God, that we need to be saved. We need to be delivered. We need to, have forgiveness. We need to have the Holy Spirit. And then God gives us all these gifts and these talents and these abilities, and love one another, right? I mean, Jesus tried to point that out to us. Like, hello, I call it the 11th commandment. Like, if you just love one another, right? You're not going to commit adultery. You're not going to murder. You're not going to steal. You're not going to do all these 10 commandment thingies.
Exactly.
Right? And you got to figure it out. It is stuff can be just so simple if we just like open our eyes to it, think more common sense oriented, which is kind of a lost art nowadays, it seems. But, those different kinds of things, and just look at that perspective that we were talking about, right? Change our world point of view.
Yes.
And just realize we're all in this together, and just so much more. I mean, we could probably talk for another hour.
We probably could.
Believe it or not, it's been about an hour. And I want to give you a chance here to close real quick and tell the people what you have to offer, and give them your information before we depart.
I definitely want to do that, but I have to say one last thing. I want people to understand you can start with baby steps. And one of the things I did, there's a scripture in Luke. I can't remember if it's Luke 8:4 or Luke 4:8. I always get that confused, but it is about the woman who had an illness and bled for like 12 years. And she went to see Jesus. And the point, though, that I love about the story is the crowd was so thick around him, she couldn't get to him. And so she just reached out to just touch his cloak. And she was instantly healed.
Yep.
And the reason that is such a powerful story to me is because for so long, I struggled so much with such deep self-loathing that I felt like I couldn't be at Jesus's feet. I couldn't be that close, but maybe I could just touch the hem of his garment and I could still be instantly healed.
That's right.
And that's what I want to leave with people thinking, if that's where you're at, if that's what you feel, you can still just touch the hem of his garment and you will be instantly healed and everything will be transformed.
Amen.
And so that was huge for me. And that's that I would actually pretend I was touching the hem of his garment to help me walk through that and step into more gifts that he's given me. And, one of them is the business coaching, which is what I do right now. And it is more about empowering women, helping business women and financial coaches know what they're doing is absolutely what should be done. I help them build strategy and I help them communicate so that the people who need them hear them the way they need to be heard. It's so much beyond just the surface. If a financial coach says, I can help you build wealth, okay, great. What about the fact that gas prices are so high and I don't have enough money to have a savings account and I don't know what I'm going to do if, our house has repairs needed. I help them figure out how to communicate on those other levels that are beyond just building wealth. And so when their steps. Exactly. So when their ideal client reads, instead of just saying they help them build wealth, okay, great. And they keep going. But if their ideal client reads and it says, oh, she's going to help me figure out how to develop a savings account. She's going to help me figure out how to plug the holes or plug the leaks in my finances. That is what appeals to the people that they really want to help. And I do the same thing with business coaches. And so I get way beyond just the surface level communication. And whether it's email or posting or messaging, that's what I do. I provide that. And most of the time it is such a drastic change. And I think definitely the hand of God. My clients generally see their client list double or triple within the first few sessions just because their language changes. So that's what I love to see. That's what I do. And that's who I am.
All right. Well, that was great. I love it. I especially like that reference to the woman with the issue of blood. I could preach a whole sermon on that.
Yes.
and what people need to understand and should hopefully be able to relate, because it touches on all of the things that we just talked about. And that's the fact she was at her wit's end.
Yep.
She'd been dealing with this thing for 12 years. She had spent all of her money. Mm-hmm. There was no hope for her left anymore. She was going to die from this thing. And it was so bad. And what's interesting about the story, you pointed out, she was crawling. She just wanted to reach the hem. There's people all around because anywhere Jesus went, there was a throng of people.
Yep.
All around him. And that was what was pointed out even in this passage, right? Because he's like, who touched me?
Yeah.
And everybody's like, Peter's over like, what's he smoking? Because
everybody's touching you.
Everyone's touching you, Lord. But the thing was, power, virtue went out of him, flowed into her. So she took the risk. She took that action step that you were talking about.
Yes.
And she was crawling on her hands and knees. She could have got cut at any moment and bled out. This was a life and death thing for her. And that's the thing. It was she just knew. She knew that she knew that she knew that she knew. She just needs to touch the hem. That's it. That's where she was. And her faith made her well, right? She became whole, restored, right? So for any of you out there today, that can be you.
Mm-hmm.
You can have that restoration. And I hope that something in today in this powerful podcast has meant something to you, and reach out to either one of us.
Yes.
And get the help that you need. We talked about that, right?
Yes.
Be an encouragement to others. Work on those gifts, those talents and abilities that you have. Draw closer to God, because He wants to draw close to you.
Absolutely.
So until next time, be blessed, everyone.
Follow Donato on Facebook and LinkedIn at Donato Parisi, or go to donatomotivates.com. Remember, you can be anything you want and desire. All you have to do is get motivated.